Hello and welcome back. So, as you may or may not be aware, the NHL regular season had a secret soft launch over the weekend. Nobody saw these games because the NHL decided to put them on NHL Network in the US, and therefore enthusiastic hockey fans like myself, who actually have time and could have watched the games, couldn't get the games at all. And this is despite the league trying to use this global series to grow the sport internationally and showcase the league's talent. So the NHL needs to do a better job of showcasing these games and getting them on ESPN or TNT. But the question for today isn't about the league's incompetent television strategy, though I could do an entire video dedicated to blackout restrictions and how ridiculous those are in 2022. But instead, today we're looking at the global series and whether or not teams are negatively affected by the travel to and from Europe. So just a quick introduction. The NHL obviously wants to showcase the league overseas, and they've been doing this in the global series since 2017. That was obviously put on hold during the COVID years, but we have it back now, and that just took place over the weekend. So teams that play in Europe, they have a ton of travel. They have to, battle through jet lag and cross different time zones, especially for teams that are coming from, all the way on the West Coast to Europe or something like that. So does this affect performance when they return, and can you use any of this information in fantasy? So that's what we're going to try to cover today. So the first global series game that we were privy to in the new incarnation of this series, because there was a bunch of European games at the beginning of the 2010s, but once this came back, it was known as the Global Series, and in 2017, it featured Colorado and Ottawa. There was 2 games overseas in Sweden, and Ottawa went 2-0. One of those games went to overtime. And obviously, if you remember back this far, Colorado, they were 30th in the league the year before. So they were not a very good team. They ended up finishing 17th in the league and making the playoffs. I believe this would have been, was that the year that McKinnon was really young? No, I think he was already established. But anyways, they went 4-5-1 after this trip overseas. And that kind of, that's pretty close to 500. It's nothing crazy, but it's definitely not as bad as Ottawa, who went 1-8-1 after this trip to Sweden, and they had a 7-game losing streak immediately following coming back to the United States, or Canada rather. They were 12th in the league the year before, and then they dropped all the way to 30th. So this definitely seemed to impact their season. They got off to a terrible start, and they just couldn't find traction after that. So this was a horrible occurrence for Ottawa to have to go through. And if you owned any of those players, you may have, there might have been some production there. Carlson was still on that team. He was obviously productive, but most of the other players, every team's going to have 3 or 4 guys that you can pick off of. And no matter how good or bad the team is, they're going to be, fantasy ownable. But when teams are this bad, then that's about it. There's no other players that come up and are fantasy ownable. So, that was definitely the case in Ottawa that season. Now, as we move to the next year, this global series back in Sweden, Edmonton versus New Jersey. The Devils won that game 5-2. This was with Taylor Hall still on the Devils. This was the year after his Hart Trophy finish. So they were 15th the year before, and they made the playoffs. They lost in 5 games or was it 4 games? I don't even remember if they got a win in that series, but Taylor Hall put the team on his back, got them into the playoffs, no less. And then Taylor Hall got injured this season, so they did end up finishing 29th. They went 4-5-1, again, pretty much average after coming home. But the main factor, I think, was the Hall injury. It wasn't like Ottawa, where their season got derailed right off the bat just because of this. Now, Edmonton went 6-3-1 in the beginning of the season there, and they were 23rd the year before, 25th in the year that this actually took place. So they didn't really get better or worse. It was kind of just they had a good return home from Europe, and it didn't really affect them too much. And obviously your guys like McDavid and Draisaitl, they were still fantasy relevant, but pretty much at this point in their careers, there wasn't a lot of fantasy relevance on their team, not like there is now. Now they've got a lot more going for them. Guys like Evander Kane, Tyson Barrie has taken back that PP1 spot as far as I've seen. He had a power play goal over the weekend in preseason. So there's a lot more to pick from this year as opposed to 2018 when Edmonton was 25th in the league. Now, that same year, they had another Global Series game in Finland, and these were the teams involved, Florida and Winnipeg. Obviously, these two Finnish superstars factored into that choice. They split the series 1-1, so nothing crazy. Nobody went 0-2 or anything like that. And then Florida, exactly 500. They started with 4 straight wins after they came home, and then they kind of lost a little bit of their juice, ran out of gas or whatever. They were 16th the year before. They finished 19th this season, so they never quite found their footing. But that necessarily, this is kind of indicative of what happened. They weren't a great team. They weren't a bad team. They were just sort of 500, and that gets you 19th in the league. Winnipeg, however, they were second the year before. Very good team, seen as a cup contender. And then they dropped a little bit to 10th, but they got off to a really decent start here, 6-3-1 after coming back from Finland, and that's not that bad. And you probably could have picked some fantasy value off of this team. There was a number of guys, Kyle Connor was a 3rd or 4th round pick there. Laine was available, Scheifele, Wheeler. I mean, there's a bunch of guys that are still there, some of them. And you can definitely take a look at that on the waiver wire this year because some of those guys are still available. But what you want to take away from this is Winnipeg was a good team the year before, and so they came out after this and still continued to put up a decent record. Now, the next game in this series was 2019, Chicago versus Philly. Neither of these teams were particularly great the year before, 20th and 22nd. The Flyers did beat the Blackhawks. Both teams kind of got off to middling starts. This was 4-5-1. That's about average. You've seen that 3 times so far in this analysis. 3-5-2, if my math is right. I think it is. That's 10 games. So Chicago, below 500 there, and they dropped a little bit from 20th to 23rd in the league that year. And I guess if you were paying attention throughout this entire time, you would have started to see the decline of Chicago and where they ended up today, completely tearing it down and rebuilding. Would have seen more like a logical progression than something, kind of shocking with all the allegations that came out that hadn't come out by this time. But if you look at Philadelphia, 22nd the year before, they rocketed up to 6th in the league in 1920. And to me, I get that seems like a one-off because they haven't been close to that since. And I was kind of banking on them. Typically what was happening with them is they'd be in the playoffs a year and then out of the playoffs and then in the playoffs and then out. And they, this was the year they were in. So I was figuring they'd eventually have a bounce back, but they just can't seem to get healthy. But on a team like this, there was fantasy value to mine. And a guy like Claude Giroux now with the Ottawa Senators. So they've lost a lot of their pieces from this team even. And then they also made that trade for Ryan Ellis, and he has been injured as well. So that's pretty unfortunate for Philadelphia. But this is a rare occurrence in this series to see a team go from 22nd to 6th. We saw a team, plummet down the standings in terms of Ottawa. But after this, it seemed like they didn't get an immediate boost, but they did get a boost later on in the season. I don't think this played a factor, however. Then in 2019, there was another series, Tampa Bay and Buffalo. Tampa Bay took both games, which was not surprising. Buffalo was 27th the year before. They finished 25th this season, and they got off to a pretty bad start once they came back, and that was more than likely a result of their team just not being that good. And then what you see here, I don't know why there's an I there, that's a typo, but Tampa Bay 5-4-1 after they came back, but they were the best team in the league the year before that, and then they finished 4th in 1920. And that was, that's to be expected. A team that is that good, they come back and they're still, barely above 500, but they did get a winning record out of that. So how do we summarize this analysis? So basically nobody played particularly great. The best record you saw there was a 6-3-1. Most of the teams played a middling 4-5-1 or 5-5 or, 3 wins out of 10. Nothing crazy. It was between 3 and 6 wins for any team that was involved. So none of them come home and light it up. None of them come home, except for Ottawa, came home and just was completely terrible and it destroyed their season. So the fact that happened to only Ottawa should show that you shouldn't stay away from, necessarily like San Jose. They didn't have a great time this season in this series, but, that's not necessarily to say that you should completely stay away from them. Because that only happened to Ottawa. It didn't happen to every other team, but they probably, all these teams that are involved, they come back and they play average hockey for a little bit, trying to get their legs underneath them. The teams who were good, the previous season fared better. So Tampa Bay and Winnipeg, they were in the top 10 in the league the year before. And so then they play these games and then they're more able to deal with the effects because their teams are likely deeper. They have more to work with, and that could be a potential place to look for fantasy value just in general, not necessarily because of this. As I mentioned before, Ottawa started slow and it destroyed their season. Philadelphia was the one outlier that actually skyrocketed after doing the Global Series. And then if you look at these two teams that were involved this year, Nashville was 16th last year and San Jose was 22nd. So what I can take away from this analysis is that these guys will probably, move up or down 2 or 3 spots. They're not likely to rocket up in the standings, especially not San Jose, given the talent that they have on their roster this year. Nashville, I could see them bumping up a little bit because they've gotten better in the offseason, adding McDonough. They added Niederreiter. Tolvanen's another year older, and he had a couple points over the weekend. So let's get into some of the fantasy relevance of what happened this weekend. As I mentioned before, the NHL is really dumb for putting these games on NHL Network. I was not able to watch them, and I was, trying to watch them, especially on the Friday game. I was home trying to prepare a video, thought I'd throw it on, watch it in the background. Couldn't even get access to it. UC Saros, he was his regular self, 1 goal against, .968 save percentage. They split the starts. Kevin Lankinen played pretty well. The following game got them the win. Nino Niederreiter is fitting in. 3 goals in 2 games. He's only 22% owned right now, so if you want to jump on that file, they don't play again until, I believe, Thursday. But he's playing on this second line, this newly created second line with Johansson, Sherwood, and Niederreiter. So that is something to keep an eye on. Sherwood is typically a 4th-line guy who earned his way into that spot. If you notice Eli Tolvanen, he had a goal and an assist, and he got moved up and saw some time on this second line as well. It seems like John Hines is rewarding players playing to their potential or above their potential by giving them some extra ice time, maybe some power play time as well. And then the other line, Forsberg, Duchesne, and Granlund, each of these guys had 2 points as well. They looked really good, and they got a bulk of the power play time as well. Nino Niederreiter actually did get some power play time, 2 minutes and 14 seconds of power play time, 3 goals, 4 hits, and a +4. So he had a fantastic weekend playing overseas, closer to his hometown. This is the Czech Republic. Obviously, he's from Switzerland, so it's not terribly far. And then just going through, we'll come back to the Sharks in a second, but Tanner Jeannot, 7 hits, led both teams, 1 block, 16 minutes, 28 seconds time on ice, and a -1. And then, some of these other guys, like I said, 2 points, 2 points, 2 points. This top power play unit is, still clicking. Ryan McDonough had a point. He looked pretty good. But now, this is a team that you could potentially mine some value. Tolvanen played really well, and he's getting some depth minutes. Jeannot's a 3rd-liner. He's getting you hits coverage. The top line is still playing like the top line did last year. Duchesne looked really good as well. Forsberg scored a nice wraparound goal, so he's found his goal-scoring touch from last year. So this is something to keep an eye on this year because not a lot of these guys have a lot of sexy on their names and their files. A lot of people wanted to, myself included, kind of wanted to stay away, thinking that last year was a one-off, but, very short sample size, very early in the season, but they looked very good over the weekend. San Jose didn't. The only ownable Sharks are the PP1 guys, which would be Meyer, Hertl, Couture, Kevin Labanc, and Erik Karlsson. But of those players, Timo Meier had a really nice weekend in terms of fantasy coverage. So 11 shots on goal led both teams in that regard. 19-21 ice time, 1 assist, 6 hits, tied for second on the weekend with 6 hits behind Tanner Jeannot. So he covered quite a bit, and that's why he got picked in the 4th round in my draft by AC Delaware River. That son of a... And then Couture, 1 goal, 6 shots, 19:33 of ice time, -2. So he's getting some shot coverage. He got a goal, looking pretty decent. He's a deep waiver play. We covered him in the deep targets video. Tomas Hertl, 1 goal, even ±, 4 shots, nothing crazy there, 19:37 of ice time. So that top line is playing 19 minutes, and those are the guys you're going to want to access. Kevin Labanc, the other guy on that PP1, 0 points, -2, but 9 shots on goal. That was second on the weekend, 18:36 of ice time. So, he's getting you PP1 exposure, and he got a ton of shot volume. So it's just something to keep in the back of your mind if you're in a really deep league, and if you desperately want exposure to a power play unit of some sort. Now, speaking of power play units, Erik Karlsson, +1, 2 shots, nothing crazy there, but 26:47 of ice time per game on average. And then the second best time on ice was his defense partner, Mario Ferraro, at 24:45. So they are playing the crap out of that D pair. So if you're looking for hits and blocks, Ferraro is one of those guys you can target, and he's getting a ton of ice time. If you're looking for regular production plus power play exposure, as I mentioned Erik Karlsson in a couple different videos. He's getting so much ice time, and he was a +1. So he's, relatively, over the weekend, relatively ineffective in terms of offensive production. They didn't end up getting any points out of that, but he was a +1, 2 shots, nothing crazy there. But the time on ice is what caught my attention there. And then the guys, on top of Ferraro getting a ton of hits in general, he also got 2 points. So he's putting up some offensive production with all that ice time. And then the only other guy who played, halfway decent for the Sharks was Luke Kunin. A goal that was on the power play, an assist, -2, 3:31 power play time on ice. So he is getting some power play time in addition to that number 1 unit. Sometimes he's getting put on there. Sometimes, somebody changes early or whatever. He's the guy going out. Just something to keep an eye on. Luke Kunin's bounced around a little bit, but he's going to get a pretty good opportunity in San Jose, probably top 6 minutes for the rest of the season. And one notable thing, none of the rookies played in this series for San Jose. So Eklund, who was on our rookie targets video, he didn't end up playing over the weekend, though he did make the trip out there. And I think, did I see Cole Bardreau was there as well, and he didn't play at all. But yeah, the rookies did not get in for San Jose, and maybe they want to think about putting them in, David Quinn, because they didn't get much offensive production from anybody up or down their lineup. And then some of the newer additions, Lindblom and blanking on the other name, they didn't have the best weekend, but it is still early, and they're starting to get their legs underneath them, get some chemistry. But if I were David Quinn, I would try to play some of the rookies just to try to give them some exposure. William Eklund, he should be probably playing in the middle 6, probably not on the top line, but middle 6 is where he would probably slot in. But it hasn't happened yet, so keep your eyes peeled for that in the future. But if you stuck through to the end of this video, I want to thank you again for sticking with the channel, and I will see you in the next one.